The Galactic Arena. The transport ship Nexus VII shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of rapid deceleration. Through the reinforced viewing ports, the massive space station arena loomed like a metallic moon, its surface bristling with weapon emplacements and docking bays. Thousands of ships from across the galaxy surrounded it, their hulls bearing the insignias of countless alien civilizations. Pressed his face against the cold glass, his breath fogging the surface as he stared at his destination. At 19, he was the youngest human ever selected for the galactic combat trials, a fact that had made headlines across Earth's colonies. What the news feeds hadn't mentioned was that he was also terrified. "First time seeing the arena?" asked a gravelly voice behind him. Turned to see Commander, a grizzled veteran with cybernetic implants replacing half his jaw. The older man's face bore the marks of countless battles, and his left arm was a military-grade prosthetic that gleamed under the ship's artificial lighting. "Yes, sir," replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's bigger than I expected." Chuckled a sound like grinding metal. "Kid, that's just the outer ring. Wait until you see the actual combat zones. Each one is the size of a small city, designed to test every possible combat scenario imaginable." The transport began its final approach, guided by tractor beams toward one of the smaller docking ports. Through the comm system, an artificial intelligence announced their arrival in the universal trade language, followed by translations in dozens of alien tongues. "Listen carefully," said, his expression growing serious. "The combat trials aren't just some sporting event. They're how the galaxy determines military rankings between species. Earth's been invited because we've shown promise in our recent conflicts, but we're still the newcomers. Most of these alien races have been perfecting warfare for millions of years." Felt his stomach clench. He'd trained for 3 years at the Sol Military Academy, mastering human combat techniques and studying alien warfare through simulations. But simulations were one thing, facing actual alien warriors was another entirely. The docking clamps engaged with a thunderous clang, and the airlocks began their cycling process. Grabbed his gear bag, checking one last time that his personal items were secure. Inside was a photograph of his family back on Mars colony, a lucky coin his grandfather had carried during Earth's water wars, and his academy graduation pin. "Remember," continued as they joined the line of passengers preparing to disembark, "you're not just representing yourself out there. Every human in the galaxy will be watching. Our species' reputation rides on your performance." No pressure at all, thought grimly. The airlock doors hissed open, revealing a corridor that seemed designed to intimidate. The walls were made of some dark metallic substance that seemed to absorb light, and the ceiling stretched up into shadows. Alien script glowed along the walls in various colors, providing directions in languages couldn't read. They were met by a reception committee of 3 beings. The first was clearly the station commander, with silver scales and 4 arms, each ending in razor-sharp claws. Her species was known throughout the galaxy as master strategists and had never lost a major war. Beside her stood a warrior, nearly 8 feet tall with stone-like skin and eyes that burned like coals. The third being was something had never seen before, a flowing, semi-transparent creature that seemed to shift between liquid and gas. "Welcome to Arena," the commander said in perfectly pronounced universal standard. "I am Admiral Station Commander. You are the human representatives." "Commander Sol Military Command," replied with a crisp salute. "And this is Recruit, our trial participant." Admiral's 4 eyes focused on with unsettling intensity. "So young," she observed. "Most species send their veteran warriors to the trials. Your people must have extraordinary confidence in this one's abilities." Felt heat rise in his cheeks but forced himself to meet her gaze. "I won't disappoint, Admiral." The warrior rumbled something in his native language, and Admiral's expression shifted to what might have been amusement. "Says you smell of fear, young human. This is not necessarily a criticism. Fear can be wisdom if properly channeled." The flowing creature spoke in a voice like wind through crystal chimes. "I am Questioner Vale of the Astral Collective. We are most curious about human combat doctrine. Your species has achieved much with primitive technology and most intriguing." They were led through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, passing viewing galleries where thousands of alien spectators had gathered to watch the upcoming trials. Caught glimpses of species he'd only read about, the Hive Queens of Prime, the energy beings from the Sigma Nebula, and dozens of others whose names he didn't even know. The combat trials consist of 3 phases, Admiral explained as they walked. Individual combat, tactical scenarios, and the final hunt. Each phase eliminates approximately half of the remaining participants. "What's the final hunt?" asked, then immediately regretted the question when he saw the predatory smile that crossed the Admiral's features. "You will learn soon enough if you survive that long." They arrived at a vast preparation chamber where representatives from 50 different species were gathered. Had studied alien physiology extensively, but seeing so many different forms of life in one place was overwhelming. There were beings of crystalline silicon, others that appeared to be made of living metal, and some that easy description altogether. A massive holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing a rotating image of what looked like a pristine jungle environment. Waterfalls cascaded down cliff faces into crystal-clear pools, while exotic plants created a canopy that filtered golden sunlight into shifting patterns on the forest floor. "Your first trial," Admiral announced to the assembled crowd, "will take place in Environment 7, a recreation of a Class M world ecosystem. Each participant will be transported to a random location within the environment. Your objective is survival and advancement. The trial ends when only 25 participants remain active." Felt his mouth go dry. 50 beings would enter, and only 25 would advance. He looked around at his competition and felt severely outclassed. A warrior nearby stood 9 feet tall, with natural armor plating that looked capable of deflecting energy weapons, and amphibious flexed tentacles that could probably crush a human skull without effort. "Participants will be equipped with standard survival gear and 1 weapon of their choice," the Admiral continued. "No advanced technology, no external communication devices, no artificial assistance. This trial tests your fundamental survival instincts and combat prowess." A series of weapon racks materialized around the chamber, displaying an impressive array of arms from across the galaxy. Walked among them, his training kicking in as he evaluated his options. Plasma rifles would be powerful but required energy cells. Molecular disruption weapons were devastating but had limited range. Traditional projectile weapons would be reliable but might not penetrate alien armor. His hand settled on a weapon that looked almost primitive compared to the advanced alien technology around it, a modified human assault rifle with an integrated grenade launcher. It was familiar, reliable, and its ammunition would be effective against a wide variety of targets. More importantly, he knew exactly how to use it. "Interesting choice," said a voice behind him, turned to see the warrior examining his selection with 4 compound eyes. "Most species choose energy weapons for their power." "Sometimes simple is better," replied, checking the weapon's mechanisms with practiced efficiency. This mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "I am of the Bone Throne clan. Your weapon speaks of a people who understand practical warfare. I look forward to facing you in combat, small human." "The feeling's mutual," said, though he hoped it wouldn't come to that. The preparation time passed quickly as checked his gear and reviewed his survival training. The standard equipment included emergency rations, a water purification unit, basic medical supplies, and a multi-tool. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep someone alive for several days if used wisely. Admiral's voice echoed through the chamber. "Participants, report to your designated transport pods. The trial begins in 10 minutes." Followed the flow of alien warriors toward a series of teleportation chambers that lined one wall. Each pod was large enough for a single being, no matter how large or unusually shaped. As he approached his assigned chamber, Felt's hand on his shoulder. "Remember your training," the older man said quietly. "Humans have one advantage out there that most aliens don't understand: our adaptability. We're persistence hunters by evolution. We don't give up and we don't know when we're beaten. Use that." Nodded and stepped into the pod. The interior was featureless except for a single control panel with a large activation button. Through the transparent door, he could see other participants entering their own pods, some looking confident, others appearing nervous despite their fearsome appearances. Admiral's countdown began echoing through the facility. "Trial initiation in 60 seconds. Participants, prepare for transport." Closed his eyes and tried to center himself, remembering the meditation techniques his academy instructors had drilled into him. Fear was natural, but it could be controlled and channeled into heightened awareness and reflexes. 30 seconds. He checked his weapon one more time, ensuring the safety was off, and a round was chambered. The grenade launcher was loaded with a high-explosive shell, with additional rounds secured to his tactical vest. 10 seconds. Opened his eyes and placed his hand on the activation button. Around him, dozens of other beings were doing the same, each preparing to face the unknown challenges ahead. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, transport initiated. The world dissolved into brilliant light and felt the familiar disorientation of matter transportation. For a moment that lasted an eternity, he existed as pure energy racing through space, before reality reasserted itself and he materialized in an alien jungle. The first thing that hit him was the humidity, thick, oppressive air that clung to his skin like a wet blanket. The second was the sound, a symphony of alien bird calls, insect buzzing, and the distant crash of water over stone. The third was the smell, rich earth, exotic flowers, and something else that made his primitive hindbrain scream danger. Quickly oriented himself, checking his surroundings with the systematic thoroughness his instructors had drilled into him. He stood on a narrow game trail that wound between massive trees whose trunks were easily 20 feet in diameter. Overhead, the canopy blocked most direct sunlight, creating a twilight environment filled with dancing shadows. The weapon rack had materialized nearby, confirming that the trial had officially begun. Somewhere in this jungle, 49 other beings were starting their own survival struggles. Some would be predators actively hunting other participants. Others would focus on finding defensible positions and resources. A few might even attempt to form temporary alliances. Shouldered his rifle and began moving along the game trail, keeping to the shadows while scanning for threats. The smart play was to avoid contact initially while gathering intelligence about the environment and other participants. Rushing into combat might eliminate a threat, but it would also reveal his position to anyone monitoring the area. As he moved deeper into the jungle, began to notice details that suggested this wasn't entirely a natural environment. The path was slightly too regular, the vegetation showed signs of careful cultivation, and there were structures hidden among the trees that looked like observation posts. The arena's creators had built a death trap disguised as a paradise. A branch snapped somewhere behind him and immediately melted into the undergrowth beside the trail. Through the foliage, he watched as a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen emerged onto the path. It moved on 6 legs that ended in sharp claws with a sleek body covered in iridescent scales. Most disturbing were its eyes, completely black, like pools of oil, but clearly intelligent and alert. The being carried what looked like a crystalline weapon that hummed with barely contained energy. It moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator, testing the air with a forked tongue and turning its head to scan the environment with mechanical precision. Held his breath and remained perfectly still as the creature passed within 10 feet of his hiding spot. Every instinct screamed at him to either attack or flee, but his training held him in place. The first rule of survival warfare was never engage unless absolutely necessary or unless you had overwhelming advantage. The alien predator continued down the trail and disappeared around a bend, leaving alone with his racing heart and the realization that he was definitely not the most dangerous thing in this jungle. He waited several more minutes before emerging from concealment, then continued along the trail in the opposite direction from where the creature had gone. The smart move was to find water, shelter, and a defensible position before nightfall. Combat could wait until he better understood the challenges he was facing. As he moved through the alien jungle, couldn't shake the feeling that his real test was only just beginning. The arena had been designed by species with millions of years of experience in warfare, and every element would be calculated to push participants to their limits. But humans had survived ice ages, predators, diseases, and countless wars through one simple trait: they refused to give up. The question was whether that would be enough when facing the deadliest beings the galaxy had to offer. The hunt begins. 3 hours into the trial, had learned several important facts about Environment 7. First, the water was safe to drink but contained minerals that made it taste like liquid metal. Second, the fruit growing on certain trees provided excellent nutrition but had to be peeled carefully to avoid toxic skin secretions. Third, something very large was hunting the other participants. He'd found evidence of the creature's work twice now. Once a patch of scorched earth where some kind of energy weapon had discharged, and once a tree trunk that had been clawed by something with razor-sharp talons the size of dinner plates. Both sites still smelled of ozone and fear pheromones from various alien species. Had established a temporary base camp in a natural cave formation about 30 feet above the jungle floor, accessible only by a narrow ledge that could be easily defended. From his elevated position, he had a clear view of multiple game trails and a small clearing where several paths converged around a natural spring. The clearing had become a killing ground. Through his rifle's scope, watched as a warrior approached the water source with typical directness. No stealth, no caution, just a straight march toward his objective. The stone-skinned giant stood nearly 9 feet tall and carried a massive war hammer that crackled with energy. It looked like the alien equivalent of a walking tank. The attack came from above with no warning whatsoever. Something dropped from the canopy like a living shadow, striking with enough force to drive the massive warrior to his knees. Got his first clear look at what had been stalking the jungle, and his blood turned to ice water. The creature was roughly humanoid but stretched to impossible proportions. Its limbs were too long, its fingers ended in claws that gleamed like surgical steel, and its hide was a mottled black-green that seemed to absorb light. Most terrifying were its eyes, completely white, without visible pupils, but tracking movement with predatory precision. But what truly sets primitive alarm bells screaming was its face. Beneath the alien features, there was something almost familiar about its bone structure, as if evolution had taken a human template and twisted it into something designed purely for killing. The roared and swung his hammer in a devastating arc that should have crushed any normal opponent. The shadow creature simply wasn't there anymore, having moved with impossible speed to circle behind the warrior. Long claws raked across the back, finding gaps in his natural armor and drawing bright blue blood. The battle was brutal and one-sided. Though was strong, experienced, and armed with advanced weaponry, but he was fighting something that moved like liquid death. Every attack the warrior made struck empty air, while the creature's counterattacks found their mark with surgical precision. Realized he was watching a master predator at work, something that had evolved or been designed specifically for hunting and killing other sentient beings. The way it moved, the tactical intelligence it displayed, even the way it seemed to enjoy the hunt suggested this wasn't just another trial participant. It was something else entirely. The finally managed to land a glancing blow that sent the creature staggering, but by then he was bleeding from dozens of wounds. The alien predator circled its prey like a cat playing with a wounded mouse, and could see the terror in the warrior's 4 eyes as he realized he was outmatched. The end came quickly. The creature feinted left, then struck from the right with blinding speed. Claws found the throat, and the massive warrior collapsed in a pool of his own blood. Expected the creature to feed, or at least examine its kill, but instead it simply vanished back into the canopy as quickly as it had appeared. The entire encounter had lasted less than 3 minutes, and one of the most formidable warriors had ever seen was dead. Through his earpiece, heard Admiral's voice announcing the first elimination. Participant of the Bone Throne clan has been eliminated. 49 participants remain active. The casual tone of the announcement chilled more than the violence he'd just witnessed. To the arena's administrators, the death of a being who had probably lived for centuries and achieved great honor among his people was just a data point. Settled back into his hiding spot and tried to process what he'd learned. The creature that had killed wasn't following the same rules as the other participants. It had appeared on none of the pre-trial briefings, carried no standard equipment, and displayed capabilities far beyond what should have been possible for any known species. Which meant this trial wasn't just about survival and combat prowess. It was about facing something that existed outside the normal parameters of galactic civilization. Over the next several hours, watch the pattern repeat itself. Individual participants would approach the water source, and the shadow creature would strike. A strategist who should have been too smart to fall into an obvious trap. An energy being from the astral collective who could phase through solid matter. A hive-mind fragment that possessed multiple bodies and distributed consciousness. All of them died the same way, quickly, efficiently, and with a precision that spoke of vast experience in killing. By sunset, the participant count had dropped to 37 and was beginning to understand the true nature of what he was facing. This wasn't a combat trial between different species. It was a hunting preserve, and most of the participants were prey. The shadow creature was the real test. As darkness fell over the jungle, made a decision that would have horrified his instructors but felt absolutely right to his gut instincts. Instead of hiding and hopping to avoid contact, he was going to hunt the hunter. Humans were persistence predators by evolutionary design. Before they developed tools and agriculture, early humans had survived by tracking prey across vast distances, wearing down larger and stronger animals through sheer stubbornness and endurance. They didn't have the strongest claws or the sharpest teeth, but they never gave up. Began his preparations with the methodical thoroughness that had been drilled into him during 3 years of military training. He checked his weapon systems, his ammunition, and reviewed everything he knew about tracking and stalking in hostile environments. The shadow creature was fast and strong, but it had shown consistent behavioral patterns. It preferred to attack from above, it targeted individuals who were focused on other tasks, and it seemed drawn to the water source in the clearing. Most importantly, it was overconfident, probably because nothing in this trial had provided any real challenge to its abilities. That was about to change. Climbed down from his cave and began setting his trap. Using techniques learned from human special forces operations, he began planting improvised explosive devices along the routes leading to the water source. The grenades from his launcher could be rigged as proximity mines using parts from his survival kit, creating a network of overlapping kill zones. Next, he established multiple firing positions around the clearing, each with clear fields of fire and prepared escape routes. The key to human combat doctrine was flexibility and adaptation. When facing a superior enemy, you didn't meet them head-on. You forced them to fight on your terms. The trap took most of the night to prepare, but used the time to also study his opponent. The creature made no effort to hide its presence once darkness fell, moving through the canopy with casual arrogance. Occasionally, it would emit a sound that was part hunting call and part challenge, a noise that seemed designed to trigger primal fear responses in its prey. Felt the fear, but he also felt something else. Anger. The creature was treating sentient beings like game animals, killing them for sport rather than necessity. That kind of predatory arrogance was something humans had spent learning to overcome. Dawn was breaking when the next victim arrived at the water source. A warrior not, but another member of the same species, identifiable by the clan markings on his natural armor. The being approached the spring with admirable caution, scanning the surrounding jungle for threats before kneeling to drink. Held his breath as the shadow creature positioned itself in the canopy directly above the unsuspecting warrior. The alien predator was following its established pattern perfectly, which meant it was about to move into the kill zone had prepared. The creature dropped from the trees with fluid grace, claws extended to deliver a killing blow. Instead of striking soft flesh, it landed directly on one of its improvised mines. The explosion was tremendous in the confined space of the jungle clearing. Ancient trees swayed under the shockwave, and every creature within a mile radius fell silent. The shadow creature was thrown backwards into a second mine, which detonated a split second later. Emerged from his concealment with his rifle already aimed at the smoke-filled clearing. The warrior had thrown himself flat and was scrambling for cover, but his attention was focused entirely on his primary target. The shadow creature rose from the smoking crater where the mines had detonated, and for the first time could see that it was capable of being hurt. Black ichor dripped from dozens of wounds, and one of its impossibly long arms hung at an unnatural angle. But it was still alive, still dangerous, and now it was very, very angry. Those white, pupilless eyes fixed on with predatory intelligence, and the creature's facial features shifted into what could only be described as a smile. For the first time in what might have been centuries, someone had provided it with an actual challenge. The warrior shouted something in his native language and raised his weapon, but the creature ignored him completely. Its attention was fixed entirely on the small human who had dared to hurt it. Centered his rifle's crosshairs on the creature's center mass and squeezed the trigger in a smooth, controlled motion. The projectile struck the alien predator square in the chest, spinning it around and eliciting a sound of pain and surprise. But it didn't go down. The creature looked down at the wound, then back at with what might have been approval. It had been hurt twice now in the span of 30 seconds, more than in all its previous hunts combined. Finally, worthy prey. What followed was unlike any combat scenario had trained for. The shadow creature moved through the jungle like a living nightmare, using its knowledge of the terrain and its supernatural speed to attack from unexpected angles. Found himself fighting a running battle through dense undergrowth, relying on his prepared positions and improvised traps to level the playing field. The alien predator was stronger, faster, and more experienced, but had advantages it didn't understand. Human military doctrine emphasized mobility, adaptability, and the use of combined arms to overcome superior enemies. Where the creature relied on overwhelming physical prowess, used terrain, explosives, and precise marksmanship to stay alive. The battle raged through the jungle for over an hour, expended half his ammunition and most of his grenades, scoring multiple hits on his opponent but never delivering a killing blow. The creature, meanwhile, came close to ending the fight several times, missing fatal strikes by margins that could be measured in millimeters. It was during a brief lull in the fighting that realized what he was actually facing. The creature wasn't just another alien species participating in the combat trials. It was a test subject, something the arena's creators had introduced to evaluate how different species responded to an absolutely superior predator. Most participants had been slaughtered like cattle, unable to adapt to an enemy that operated outside their understanding of normal combat parameters. But humans were different. They had evolved alongside predators that were stronger, faster, and better armed than they were. Survival had depended on outsmarting their enemies, not outfighting them. The revelation gave a new strategy. Instead of trying to kill the creature outright, he began focusing on wearing it down. He led it through patches of toxic vegetation that he could navigate safely, but which burned its alien flesh. He lured it into terrain that favored his mobility while hindering its natural advantages. He forced it to expend energy while conserving his own. The persistence hunting instinct that had carried early humans across continents in pursuit of prey now served, as he gradually turned the tables on a predator that had never faced such tactics. As the sun reached its zenith, the shadow creature was beginning to show signs of fatigue. Its movements were still deadly fast, but no longer effortless. The wounds it inflicted were taking their toll, and the alien predator was starting to make mistakes born of frustration and exhaustion. That's when sprang his final trap. He had saved one grenade specifically for this moment, a high-explosive round loaded with depleted uranium shrapnel that could penetrate virtually any known armor. As the creature lunged at him across a narrow ravine, fired the grenade at point-blank range. The explosion in the confined space was catastrophic, was thrown backwards by the shockwave and nearly blacked out from the concussive force. When his vision cleared, he found himself staring at the motionless form of the alien predator, its body twisted and broken at the bottom of the ravine. Through his earpiece, Admiral's voice crackled with what might have been amazement. The apex predator has been eliminated. First successful termination in arena history. 36 participants remain active. Struggled to his feet, his ears ringing and his body aching from the prolonged combat. Around him, the jungle had fallen completely silent, as if every living thing was processing the fact that the apex predator was truly dead. He looked down at the creature's corpse and felt no satisfaction, only a weary acknowledgement of necessity. The being had been a magnificent predator, perfectly adapted for its role, but it had made the mistake of treating humans like every other species it had encountered. Humans didn't follow the normal rules of predator and prey relationships. They were the only species that had ever looked at something bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than themselves, and decided that it needed to die. Not for food, not for territory, but simply because it posed a threat to their survival. As began the long process of treating his wounds and resupplying from the creature's kill sites, he reflected on what the victory meant. 35 other participants were still alive in the trial, and many of them would have witnessed or heard the sounds of his battle with the apex predator. They now knew that humans could do something none of their species had managed: kill a creature that had been specifically designed to be unkillable. The real test was only just beginning, the final hunt. The elimination of the apex predator had changed everything about the combat trials. Where before the surviving participants had been scattered prey animals hiding from an ultimate hunter, they were now converging on its location with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and calculation. Some wanted to study the human who had achieved the impossible. Others wanted to eliminate a potential threat before he could turn his proven lethality against them. had anticipated this development and abandoned his jungle base camp within hours of the apex predator's death. Using skills learned from human special operations manuals, he had covered his tracks and moved to a defensive position high in the mountain range that dominated the eastern edge of Environment 7. From his new vantage point, he could observe the jungle below while maintaining multiple escape routes through the rocky terrain. More importantly, he could see the other participants as they cautiously explored the battle site where he had faced the alien killing machine. Through his rifle scope, counted 15 different beings examining the crater where his final grenade had detonated. They moved with the careful precision of experienced warriors, but he could sense their unease. The scorched earth and scattered alien flesh told a story that didn't match their understanding of how warfare was supposed to function. The strategist Admiral had mentioned during the briefing was there, her silver scales glinting in the filtered sunlight as she examined claw marks on nearby trees. Beside her, 3 members of what appeared to be a temporary alliance were reconstructing the battle from physical evidence with methodical thoroughness. Recognized the tactical problem he now faced. The apex predator had been a force of nature, dangerous but predictable in its behavior patterns. These remaining participants were intelligent, adaptable, and capable of learning from what they observed. Worse, they would now be actively hunting him instead of simply trying to survive until the trial's end. The smart move would be to avoid contact and wait for them to eliminate each other through natural attrition, but was beginning to understand that the arena's creators had designed this trial with multiple layers of challenge. The apex predator had been the first test. Could the participants survive contact with an ultimate killing machine? Now came the second test. Could they adapt their strategies when facing an opponent who had proven capable of achieving the impossible? Through his earpiece, Admiral's voice announced the trial's transition to its next phase. Attention participants. Environment 7 will begin its nocturnal cycle in 6 hours. All surviving contestants are hereby that active hunting protocols are now in effect. Eliminations will continue until only one participant remains active. Felt his stomach drop. The trial had just become a battle with participants who now considered him the primary threat. Every advantage he had gained by eliminating the apex predator was about to be turned against him. But humans had faced worse odds before. The species had survived ice ages, eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless wars through one simple principle. When facing extinction, they adapted faster than their environment could kill them. Began implementing a strategy that would have seemed insane to most military theorists, but made perfect sense to a persistence hunter. Instead of hiding and waiting for his enemies to find him, he was going to hunt them first. The remaining participants had formed 3 distinct groups, each following different strategic approaches. The largest group, led by the strategist, had established a fortified position around the water source and was attempting to control the jungle's central resources. A smaller group of solo hunters was using stealth and mobility to avoid direct confrontation while picking off isolated targets. The third group consisted of the alliance had observed earlier, a coordinated unit that was systematically searching for him with military precision. Chose to target the solo hunters first. They were dangerous individually, but lacked the support networks that made the other groups formidable. More importantly, eliminating them would reduce the total number of threats while potentially providing valuable intelligence about the other factions. His first target was an assassin who had been stalking the jungle's northern quadrant with patient professionalism. The amphibious being possessed natural camouflage capabilities that made it nearly invisible in the dense vegetation, but had learned to track it by the subtle environmental changes its passage created. There was good, probably one of the best stealth specialists its species had ever produced, but it had evolved for aquatic environments, and its techniques were optimized for underwater hunting. In a terrestrial jungle, its advantages were diminished while training in woodland warfare gave him the edge. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. Used the terrain to force the into a position where its camouflage was ineffective, then eliminated it with precise rifle fire before it could bring its own weapons to bear. The alien assassin died without ever knowing exactly where the shots had come from. Admiral's voice confirmed the elimination. Participant Vex of the tidal reaches has been eliminated. 35 participants remain active. Immediately displaced from his firing position and began stalking his next target, a crystalline being from the Sigma system that moved through the jungle like animated diamond. The creature was nearly indestructible by conventional weapons, but had observed that it relied on absorbing energy from its environment to maintain its coherent structure. Using lessons learned from human asymmetric warfare, didn't try to destroy his target directly. Instead, he used improvised thermite charges to raise the ambient temperature around the creature to levels that destabilized its crystalline matrix. When the being began to lose molecular cohesion, a single well-placed shot from his rifle shattered it like glass. Participant chorus of shattering light has been eliminated. 34 participants remain active. The elimination of 2 skilled solo hunters within an hour had not gone unnoticed by the remaining participants. Could see increased activity around both the fortified position and the systematic search teams. They were adapting their strategies to account for an active threat that was hunting them instead of hiding. Which was exactly what wanted. The fundamental principle of persistence hunting was that the predator controlled the pace and location of encounters, while the prey exhausted itself trying to respond to threats. By forcing his opponents to react to his actions, was turning their superior numbers and equipment into liabilities rather than advantages. His next target was the systematic search team, which had proven dangerously effective at tracking his movements through the jungle. The group consisted of 5 beings from different species, each contributing unique sensory capabilities to their collective hunting effort. Taken individually, any one of them would be a formidable opponent. Working together, they represented the single greatest threat to his survival. But cooperation was also their weakness. A coordinated group required communication, agreed-upon procedures, and predictable behavior patterns. Had spent considerable time observing their search techniques and had identified the crucial flaw in their approach. They were searching for a target that followed conventional military doctrine. Humans didn't always follow conventional military doctrine. Waited until the search team had established a temporary base camp in a defensible clearing, then began implementing harassment tactics that would have been familiar to guerrilla fighters throughout human history. A sniper shot that wounded but didn't kill, forcing the team to expend resources on medical care. Improvised explosive devices placed along their patrol routes, creating psychological stress without necessarily eliminating targets. Sabotage of their equipment during periods when they thought they were secure. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective against beings who had trained for direct confrontation rather than asymmetric conflict. Within hours, the search team was showing signs of paranoia and exhaustion. Their careful coordination began to break down as stress and fatigue took their toll. Struck during the transition between day and night shifts, when the team's alertness was at its lowest ebb. Using techniques perfected by human special forces, he eliminated 2 sentries in rapid succession before the rest of the team could respond effectively. The remaining 3 members of the search team fought with desperate courage, but they were facing an enemy who had spent the entire day studying their weaknesses while remaining invisible to their detection methods. The engagement was fierce but one-sided, ending when final grenade eliminated the last of his opponents. Admiral's announcements came in rapid succession. Participant of the Bone Throne clan has been eliminated. Participant Echo 7 of the Hive network has been eliminated. Participant Void Walker has been eliminated. 31 participants remain active. The elimination of the search team sent shock waves through the remaining participants. Could see frantic activity around the fortified position as the survivors realized they were facing a human who fought unlike anything in their military experience. Their casualties were mounting, while their opponent remained an invisible threat. But wasn't invisible, and he wasn't invulnerable. The constant movement and combat were taking their toll on his human physiology. His ammunition was running dangerously low, his food supplies were nearly exhausted, and he had accumulated numerous minor injuries that were beginning to impact his effectiveness. More importantly, the remaining participants were adapting to his tactics. Instead of spreading out in search patterns, they were consolidating into a single defensive position and forcing him to come to them. The strategy eliminated his mobility advantages while maximizing their collective firepower. Studied the fortified position through his rifle scope and felt a grudging respect for the tactical intelligence being displayed. The survivors had chosen their ground well, a natural amphitheater surrounded by steep cliffs, with only 3 narrow approaches that could be easily defended. They had clear fields of fire, adequate supplies, and enough combined firepower to eliminate anything that approached their perimeter. They were also making a critical mistake that revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of human warfare doctrine. They were thinking like prey animals that had decided to make a final stand. But wasn't a predator in the traditional sense. He was a persistence hunter, and persistence hunters never attacked fortified positions directly. They waited for their targets to come to them, to a concealed position nearly a mile from the fortified camp, and began the most challenging phase of persistence hunting, the waiting game. He had food and water for perhaps 2 more days, while the survivors in their fortress had supplies for considerably longer. But they also had to maintain constant vigilance against an enemy who could attack at any time from any direction. The psychological pressure of being hunted was something humans understood better than any other species. They had been both predators and prey throughout their evolutionary history, and they knew that the stress of constant alertness was more exhausting than actual combat. Waited 18 hours before making his first move, and when he acted, it wasn't an attack on the fortified position itself. Instead, he eliminated one of the outlying sentries who had been positioned to watch for his approach. The kill was silent and efficient, but more importantly, it was visible to the defenders in the main camp. Now they knew he was close, but they didn't know where he would strike next. Over the following day, eliminated 3 more sentries using the same pattern silent kills that were discovered by the main group, but provided no indication of where he might be hiding. Each elimination increased the psychological pressure on the survivors while reducing their ability to detect his movements. The defenders were trapped in a fortress that had become a prison. They couldn't leave to hunt him down without exposing themselves to attack, but staying inside meant watching their numbers dwindle while their enemy remained invisible. Admiral's announcements tracked the steady reduction in participants. 27 remain active, 24 remain active, 21 remain active. By the 3rd day of the siege, the survivors had reached their breaking point. Watched through his scope as heated arguments broke out among the defenders. Some wanted to abandon the fortified position and hunt him down. Others insisted on maintaining their defensive posture. A few were clearly considering surrender, though the arena's rules made that impossible. The final assault came when the defenders made their last tactical error. Driven by desperation and exhaustion, they decided to split their forces and conduct an active search for position. Half would remain in the fortress, while the others would sweep the surrounding area in a coordinated pattern. Had been waiting for exactly this decision. He allowed the search teams to move into predetermined kill zones before striking with every remaining weapon at his disposal. The coordinated ambush eliminated 6 participants in the first 30 seconds, and the survivors' attempted withdrawal became a rout when they realized their fortress was under simultaneous attack from multiple directions. The final engagement was brutal and decisive. Had spent 3 days studying every aspect of the defender's position, identifying weaknesses and planning his assault with methodical precision. When he finally moved against them, it was with the overwhelming force concentration that characterized human military doctrine. The last defender was the strategist who had impressed with her tactical intelligence throughout the trial. She died fighting with honor, maintaining her position even when it became clear that defeat was inevitable. Admiral's final announcement echoed across Environment 7. All participants except of Sol Command have been eliminated. Trial complete. Victory to the human representative. Stood alone in the silent jungle, surrounded by the evidence of battles that had raged across an artificial wilderness. His ammunition was exhausted, his equipment was destroyed, and his body was pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. But he was alive, and everyone else who had entered the trial was dead. The transport beam activated automatically, pulling him back to Arena's medical facilities. As reality dissolved around him, reflected on what he had accomplished. He hadn't just won a combat trial, he had demonstrated that humans possessed capabilities that fundamentally challenged the galaxy's understanding of warfare. When he materialized in the Arena's medical bay, found himself facing a crowd of alien officials whose expressions ranged from amazement to concern. Admiral stepped forward, her 4 arms spread in what he recognized as a gesture of profound respect. In 15,000 years of combat trials, she said quietly. No participant has ever achieved complete elimination of all opponents. Your species has introduced tactical concepts that were unknown to our military science. Commander appeared at side, his face showing pride and relief in equal measure. How do you feel, son? Considered the question seriously. He had killed dozens of beings, many of whom had been worthy of respect and honor. He had survived challenges that should have been impossible for a 19-year-old recruit from a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. But more than that, he had proven something important about humanity. They weren't the strongest species in the galaxy or the most technologically advanced. But they were the ones who never gave up, who adapted to any challenge, and who turned their weaknesses into strengths through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. I feel like we just announced ourselves to the galaxy, replied, and I think we got their attention. Admiral's expression suggested that was something of an understatement. The combat trials had been designed to evaluate military capabilities and determine ranking among galactic civilizations. Its performance had shattered every assumption about human warfare doctrine and raised uncomfortable questions about what Earth species might be capable of given time and resources. As medical technicians began treating his injuries, realized that his victory in the arena was just the beginning. The galaxy now knew that humans could achieve the impossible when properly motivated. The question was what they would do with that knowledge. But that was a problem for diplomats and admirals to solve. 19-year-old recruit from Mars colony had done his part. He had faced the deadliest predator the galaxy could create, and he had won. The rookie had beaten the apex predator, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.